Fat man.
Fat man. I was going to use that line in reference to Johannes Brahms. But I guess this could also be true in reference to Darius Milhaud. 1917, World War I, starting to wind down in the trenches of northeastern France. All the theaters in Paris are pretty much shut down. You might say it was a quarantine, but that didn't stop Blaise Cendrars from holding some concerts. He was a one-armed poet by that point. His right arm had gotten blown off in 1915, so that was his excuse for being home. Why is it that all the casualties seemed to be left-hand surviving candidates, all those concerti for the left hand that we heard earlier? At any rate, his concert in 1917 featured music of Eric Satie, Louis Duret, looking unfortunately a little bit like an unmustachioed Hitler here, the Swissman Arthur Honegger, and a much younger but looking older in this picture. This is 1940 as opposed to Honegger's 1928 there. This is Georges Auric. After this, Satie thought it would be a pretty good idea to have a circle of composers around him, and he called them Le Nouveau Jeune, the new young. These are pictures of Satie, by the way, by Pablo Picasso and Jean Cocteau. Satie seems to have lost the impetus of the idea by the next year, but Jean Cocteau, the artiste illustrating Satie over there on the right, picks up on the idea. Cocteau keeps the idea that they're all kind of associated with Satie, kind of in rebellion against not only Romanticism, but even the music of Claude Debussy and the younger Ravel. He adds to their number Darius Milhaud, Germain Telefier, and the much younger, well, somewhat younger, Francis Poulenc, exact contemporary actually of Georges Auric. And voila, Les Six, the Six, is born. They actually do one joint piece together as opposed to a joint piece separately, and that would be Le Mari de la Tour Eiffel, the newlyweds at the Eiffel Tower. Well, 5 of 6, Duret does not participate. Here they are together with Jean Cocteau, or most of them. Identify them? Oh, there they are, Darius over there, and Jean at the piano, despite the fact he is actually the least musical of them. He's more of a jack-of-all-trades artiste, writer, etc., than Arthur Honegger, Germain Telefier, Francis Poulenc, and over there Duret, and Georges Auric only in the design picture behind them, which is pretty much indecipherable, is it not? There's another composer and writer, Henri Colette, who supposedly coined the name Les Six in inspiration and contradistinction for the 19th century Russian Five. Did they have that much in common, stylistically, spiritually? Well, yes and no. And what are all these able-bodied young people not fighting in the war, pray tell? Well, in Darius Milhaud's case, he had been actually serving as an attaché to the French diplomat in Rio de Janeiro. And here's a picture of Rio 3 years before Darius's birth. This is from 1889. Here's a more contemporary shot of Rio. And it profoundly influences Darius Milhaud. He comes home with memories of Brazil, Saudades de Brazil, a very ambitious, wonderful piano piece, quite rhythmic, and also The Ox on the Roof. It was originally the name of a Brazilian folk song, and Milhaud turned that song and a whole coterie, maybe about 30 pieces, into a large-scale composition. It was originally conceived as a film score to a Charlie Chaplin movie. It was back in the silent era, and you're seeing actually Chaplin in a much later movie, Modern Times, from 1936. But it was transformed into a ballet with a storyline by Jean Cocteau and scenic designs by the Fauvist artist Raoul Dufay. The piece became so popular that a bar was established in Paris by that name. The ballet is from 1920, and by 1921 it became a restaurant that opened in Paris where Les Six and Jean Cocteau tended to hang out. And here they are hanging out in 1922. Who are they exactly? Well, I'm glad you asked. We've got, this is a painting by Jacques-Émile Blanche, and in this painting of 8 people, only 5 of Les Six are represented. Louis Duret was not present. In the center, pianist Marcel Meyer. On the left, from the bottom to the top, Germaine Taillefer, Darius Milhaud, Arthur Honegger, then Jean Vénère, and she is front and center, not a member of Les Six. Then on the right, standing, Francis Poulenc, there's Jean Cocteau next to him, and then finally Georges Auric. Le Boeuf sur le Toit is still going strong to the present day, incidentally. Here it is in 2007. Not much clientele. Social distancing, anyone? Well, here's the explanation. The many relocations of Le Boeuf sur le Toit proved ruinous to the effervescent spirit of the original cabaret. Le Boeuf sur le Toit exists as a chic restaurant to this day, but the glamour, social cachet, avant-garde milieu, and bohemian atmosphere, they are a distant memory. Milhaud did more in these years, however, than just hang out in Parisian bars. He also took in, like institutions, I guess, in London, where he first heard American jazz, possibly by Nick LaRocca and the original Dixieland jazz band that had made their premiere in London. Milhaud was there in 1920, and the original Dixieland jazz band had first hit the London scene the year before in 1919. Milhaud was impressed enough that he went all the way to Harlem, New York, 2 years later in 1922, where while he heard jazz bands, he probably didn't hear King Joe Oliver's Creole jazz band that had formed that year but was playing in Chicago. And that second trumpeter is none other than Louis Armstrong, of course. So, La Création du Monde, small chamber orchestra. 2 flutes, 1 oboe, 2 B-flat clarinets, 1 basson, that would be bassoon, 1 horn, 2 trumpets, 1 trombone, piano. A fairly large array of percussion, but all of that is in the new tradition of the jazz band, played by 1 individual, with the exception of the timpani, the trois timbales that are a player. And then we have what looks like a string quintet. Close, we've got our first and second violin and our cello and our bass, but instead of viola, a saxophone, E-flat alto saxophone, sitting in amongst the strings. And here's the first page. There's a fair amount of bitonality, which is a hallmark of Milhaud's work. It's an African creation rather than the Western Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. And it opens with this ripping chord. We're in D. There's Do, So, Re. Up here is the 9th. We call it the 2nd, so that would be Re, Mi, Mi. There's blues for you. So, and it rips as written at arpeggio. 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. It's in 4/4 time, but that happens every 3 beats. So we're talking a polyrhythm or bimetrical structure. Hey, you buy? Yeah, metrical. And we have some percussion clanking around under there, rolled timpani, and then the main melody of the Fugato, D blues, and it's in a very high string bass bowed rather than pizzicato, which is, the typical jazz approach. And it would be do, do, re, do, mi, do, re, do, mi, me, do, sol, la, sol, te, la, sol, re, mi, do, ti, te, sol, la, sol, te, la, sol, fa. Haven't had a fa yet. And then back up to fi, fi, fa, mi, re. By that time, you've got the second statement of the fugue coming in. Not a fifth above. Oh no, only a second above on the trombone. So it could be the same solfege transposed up a major second. Then the third entrance is from the alto sax. So we're up here. And so we're going to have... So we actually have the fifth relationship there. So we had root, second, fifth on that entrance. And the fourth entrance, and this is all in 4/4 against the 3/4. So you got all this cognitive dissonance, a lot of tension. And then the final is back to the root, and it's also farther up. So your entrances are actually here, do, re, so, do, and of course, as each instrument comes in, the previous instrument turns into counter subjects. So by that point, we have 3 counter subjects and 1 subject. And I guess those 2 interior ones are the answers, right? So you have subject, answer, answer, subject. Through line, in 1925, he marries his cousin, Madeleine. And Madeleine was born in 1902, so he's considerably robbing from the cradle. They have 1 son in 1930. I had the privilege of interviewing Madeleine Milhaud much later in her life. I was familiar with her work as an actress since a terribly wonderful recording of Stravinsky's Histoire du Soldat featured her as narrator in both French and English. I interviewed her, I believe she was 98 years old, at Mills College, and there's a story to be told vis-a-vis Mills, but we'll get to it. At any rate, we had a wonderful time. She was just a charming, sweet woman of a certain age, vivacious. She went back to France, and typically I would send my rough draft of interviews to composers for them to authorize. And she called me, well, we somehow talked long distances. She said, "Oh, Mark, my English is so bad. I don't think we should publish the interview." I was desperate. I really wanted to publish it. But I got pragmatic and said, well, she's 98. How long do I have to wait here? Well, she didn't die until she was 106 years old. Bless her heart. And by that time, I kind of forgot about publishing the interview. Maybe someday. Why did I interview Madeleine Milhaud at Mills College? Well, way back in 1940 when the Nazis were rearing their ugly heads, more than that, I guess it was already World War II, wasn't it? Darius, being Jewish, and also, of course, Madeleine, they had to hightail it out of there, and they wound up settling in Oakland. Darius accepted a position at Mills College, and here's Mills as it looked in 1873, which is, of course, a few years before even Darius was born. But nevertheless, it's a nice pastoral shot, isn't it? Even after it was safe to go back to France, Milhaud pretty much taught at Mills off and on through to the end of his life. He was wheelchair bound the last couple of years. Died in 1974, and this is a picture of Milhaud on the wall of the Mills College Music Building. It's an undergraduate women's institution, but co-educational for graduate school. And as such, Milhaud taught generations of students, including, the list goes on and on. William Bolcom, Dave Brubeck, local fame, right? Concord, California. Look at that, Charles Dodge, the computer music composer. Philip Glass, Paul Griffiths, the writer. Ben Jonson, microtonal composer. Georgie Kurtag, Yvonne Laureate, Steve Reich, Peter Shekely, wow, Ramon Sender, Seymour Schifrin, Peter Westergaard, Yannis Xenakis, unbelievable. And finally, Lacey's much later, maybe around the 1950s. Back row, Francis Poulenc, Germain Taillefer, Georges Auric, Louis Duret. Front row, Arthur Honegger, Jean Cocteau, Darius Milhaud.